When my husband was buried, his doctor called me and said, I found something in her records. You need to come see it before you leave for the reception. Then she added, and don't bring your daughter or your son-in-law with you. It isn't safe yet. When I pulled into that parking lot and saw who was already there waiting for me, I felt my whole chest go cold. If you're new to this channel, welcome, friend. Stick around because this one is going to take a turn you won't see coming. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button for me. And if you haven't subscribed, now's as good a time as any, because trust me, neighbor, you're going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Walter Griggs. I'm 64 years old, and for 31 years I ran a small engine repair shop off Route 9 outside of Hagerstown, Maryland. Lawnmowers, tillers, the odd generator, whatever people in this county needed fixed. I married my wife, Carol, when I was 26 years old, and we were together for 38 years before she passed. This is her story more than it's mine, and I need you to hear all of it, because she deserved better than what almost happened to her memory. The funeral was on a Thursday, the 9th of October, at Whitcomb Family Funeral Home on Dual Highway. It was one of those flat gray fall days where the sky doesn't commit to rain. It just sits there heavy and waits. I stood at the front of that room in the only good suit I own, the navy one I'd worn to our daughter's wedding 12 years back, looking at a casket that held the only woman I ever loved. And some part of me kept expecting her to sit up and tell me I had my tie crooked, because that woman never let me leave the house looking sloppy. Carol had died 11 days before that, and the hospital called it a stroke. Sudden, they said. Her blood pressure had been climbing for months, and her heart just couldn't keep up with it one Tuesday morning while I was out at the shop. I believed every word of it, friend, because grief doesn't leave much room for suspicion, and because I had no earthly reason to think otherwise. My wife had spent 19 years working the front desk and running the schedule for Dr. Renata Okafor, a cardiologist who had built up one of the busiest private practices in Washington County. Carol adored that job. She used to come home and tell me Dr. Okafor trusted her with things she wouldn't even tell her own nurses. And looking back now, I understand exactly how much truth was sitting inside that sentence. About 50 people came out for the service, our neighbors from Longmeadow Drive, a few of Carol's old church friends, my cousin who drove up from Roanoke. Our daughter, Denise, sat in the front pew next to her husband, Blake. And I remember noticing, even through my own fog of grief, that neither one of them cried. Not a single tear. Denise kept her purse in her lap the whole service with her hand resting on top of it like she was guarding something, and Blake kept checking his watch. Subtle about it, but I caught it twice. At exactly 11:40 that morning, right as the pastor was finishing his closing prayer, my phone buzzed against my hip. I almost let it go to voicemail out of respect for the room. Then I glanced down and saw the name on the screen, Dr. Renata Okafor, and something in me just knew I had to answer it. I slipped out into the hallway, my pulse already climbing, and when I picked up, her voice was tight, in a way I had never once heard from that woman in 19 years of Carol working for her. Walter, she said, I found something. You need to come to my office as soon as this service ends. To understand why that call scared me the way it did, friend, you have to understand who Renata Okafor was. She was not a woman who rattled easily. I'd met her a handful of times over the years. At the office Christmas party. At the retirement dinner Carol kept postponing because she loved that job too much to let it go. Every time she was composed, sharp, the kind of doctor who remembered the names of her patients' grandchildren. Hearing her voice shake on the phone told me something had gone badly wrong somewhere. What did you find? I asked her, standing there in that quiet hallway with the last notes of the organ still drifting out from behind the door. Not over the phone, she said. Come to the office. And Walter, listen to me. Don't tell Denise. Don't tell Blake. Not yet. You could be in danger. I need to back up here and tell you about my family, because none of what happened after makes a lick of sense without it. Carol and I built a modest life on a mechanic's income and her front desk wages. Nothing extravagant, but we owned our house on Longmeadow Drive outright. We'd put away a decent retirement, and we'd helped our daughter, Denise, more times than I care to admit over the years. Denise was 34, married to Blake for 7 years, and the two of them had been sliding in and out of financial trouble since Blake's construction company folded back in 2021. They'd started up some kind of home staging business that never quite got off the ground, and over the past year, they'd been coming around a whole lot more than usual. Sunday dinners turned into Tuesday visits, turned into Blake offering, seemingly out of the blue, to help Carol get her finances organized and simplified. Since, in his words, you two aren't getting any younger and things need to be easy to find. I didn't think much of it. Carol didn't either. Looking back, that's exactly the mistake we made. In the weeks before Carol died, something had shifted in her, and I hadn't paid it the mind I should have. She was more tired than usual. She said her chest felt tight some mornings, said her thoughts felt slow and syrupy in a way that wasn't like her at all, and her cardiologist, doctor, Okafor herself had adjusted her blood pressure medication twice, trying to get ahead of it. Denise had started stopping by on Mondays and Thursdays, always with the same reason, to help Carol sort her pills into the weekly organizer so she wouldn't lose track. I remember one Thursday afternoon in late August. I'd come home early from the shop because a part hadn't come in, and I found Denise alone in our kitchen, with Carol's pill organizer open on the counter, and Carol asleep on the recliner in the middle of the afternoon, which was not something my wife ever did. Denise looked up at me and smiled, said Mom had just tired herself out gardening, and left about 10 minutes after I walked in. I didn't think a thing of it. My wife trusted our daughter. I trusted my wife. About a week before she died, Carol asked me if I remembered signing some documents with her at the kitchen table back in June. Something to do with adding a joint name to our investment account in case one of us needed help managing things down the road. I told her I had no memory of signing anything like that. She frowned, said Blake had mentioned bringing something like that by for us to look over, and figured she'd just forgotten. We let it drop. We had no cause to think otherwise. The morning she passed, a Tuesday, I was at the shop running a diagnostic on a customer's riding mower. Carol called Denise first because my hands were greasy and my phone was clear across the shop. And by the time I got the message and made it home 19 minutes later, the ambulance was already pulling out of our driveway. She was gone before they even reached Meredith Medical Center. Stroke, they told me. Sudden, unexpected, tied to her blood pressure history. Nobody asked a single question past that. And in my grief, friend, God forgive me, neither did I. Standing in that hallway, outside the funeral home with Dr. Okafor's voice shaking in my ear, all of it came rushing back at once, the pill organizer, the papers I never signed. The way Denise and Blake had been circling my wife for months, like they were waiting on something to finish. Renata, tell me what's going on, I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry back into the chapel. I can't explain it over the phone, Walter. Carol left something with me, a letter and a flash drive. She dropped it off 6 weeks ago and told me only to open it if anything happened to her. And Walter, I opened it this morning after I saw the obituary. And what's on it? I need you to see it with your own eyes. Come straight here. Don't stop at the house. And whatever you do, don't mention this call to Denise or Blake. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I went back inside, sat through the last few minutes of the service without hearing a word of it, and when the pastor closed and folks started filing out toward the cars for the burial, I told Denise I had some paperwork from Carol's life insurance that I needed to sort out that afternoon and that I'd meet everyone back at the house afterward for the gathering. Denise barely looked up from adjusting her purse strap. Sure, Dad. Whatever you need to do. Blake didn't even glance my way. He was already halfway to the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, talking low and fast to someone I couldn't make out. I stood there a second, watching my son-in-law hurry away from his mother-in-law's own burial, like he had somewhere far more urgent to be. And that cold feeling from the hallway settled in even deeper. I climbed into my truck, a green 2014 Chevy Silverado with a little over 160,000 miles on it, and I drove across town toward Dr. Okafor's practice on Robinwood Drive, with my wife's grave still fresh behind me, having no idea whatsoever that the hardest part of that day hadn't even started yet. Okafor Cardiology Associates took up the second floor of a medical office building near the hospital, the kind of building Carol used to point at with a little quiet pride every time we drove past. I parked in the side lot around 12:20, still in my funeral suit, tie loosened, my mind cycling through every possible thing Renata could need to show me. I walked through the empty waiting room. The practice was closed for the afternoon, staff given the time off out of respect past the front desk where Carol used to sit, and headed down the hall toward Renata's private office. That's when I saw a car swing hard into the small visitor lot outside, too fast, cutting the turn close. It was Blake's black Dodge Charger. I stopped dead, in the hallway. My son-in-law was supposed to be at the cemetery right now, standing beside his wife, shaking hands with the neighbors, doing what a son-in-law does on the day his wife's mother goes into the ground. Instead, here he was, clear across town at her cardiologist's office, less than 25 minutes after telling me nothing at all, because he hadn't even bothered to say goodbye. I stepped back into a little alcove near the supply closet, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I watched through the glass front doors as Blake got out of his car and jogged toward the entrance, straightening his jacket, his face tight and pale in a way I had never seen on that man before. He wasn't grieving. He looked like a man racing a clock he couldn't see. I stayed pressed against that wall for what felt like a full minute, watching Blake try the locked front doors, rattle the handle twice, then pull out his phone and start pacing the little sidewalk out front, talking fast with his free hand, cutting the air. I couldn't make out the words through the glass, but I didn't need to. He was trying to get in. He was trying to get in before I did. Renata came around the corner from her office just then, saw me pressed against that wall, and her face went pale. "Walter, thank God," she said. And before I could get a single word out, she added, "Did you see him out there?" "That's my son-in-law," I said. "Renata, what in the world is going on? Why is Blake here?" Her jaw tightened. "Because your daughter called this office this morning asking to speak with me directly before the service. My receptionist, God love her, told Denise I was tied up with something regarding Carol's file, and I think that was enough to send Blake racing over here to try to get to it before you did." My stomach dropped clean through the floor. Get to what before I did? Renata led me down the hall toward her private office, and over her shoulder, without turning around, she said the words that changed everything for me. "Your wife knew something was happening to her, Walter, and she made absolutely sure I would be the one to tell you, not them." Her office was small and warm, family photos on the shelf, a window looking out over the parking lot where Blake was still pacing below, unaware we could see him. She closed the door and locked it, then went to a filing cabinet behind her desk and pulled out a sealed manila envelope with Carol's handwriting across the front. "For Walter's eyes only, if anything happens to me." She brought this to me a little over 6 weeks ago, Renata said, sitting down in the chair across from me instead of behind her desk, which told me something about how serious she considered this. She said she didn't trust keeping it at the house. Said if anything happened to her, I was to give it to you, and only you, in person, and to be careful who I told beforehand. My hands shook, opening it. Inside was a single folded letter in Carol's handwriting and a small flash drive taped to the back of the page. I read the letter sitting right there in that office chair. In it, Carol wrote that she'd noticed money slowly disappearing from our investment account. Small transfers at first, growing larger over about 5 months. She wrote that she'd asked Blake about paperwork she didn't remember signing, and he'd waved it off with some story about streamlining the accounts. But something in his face when she pushed made her uneasy enough that she started quietly digging through our statements herself, using the online login she still remembered from managing our household finances for 30 years. She wrote that she'd found a document filed with our brokerage, adding Denise as a joint account holder, dated back in June, with our 2 signatures on it, except she never signed it, and she was near certain I hadn't either. She wrote that she'd started feeling strange around the exact same time Denise began coming by to help with her medication, and that she didn't want to believe what she was starting to suspect, but she refused to just sit quiet and hope she was wrong. "There's more on the drive," Renata said softly. "Financial records. Messages. Walter, I think you should brace yourself for this next part." She plugged the flash drive into her laptop and turned the screen so I could see it. The first folder held bank statements Carol had photographed herself. 4 separate transfers highlighted in yellow, moving out of our investment account between May and September, adding up to just over $74,000. Every one of them authorized using that joint account document neither of us had ever signed. The money had landed in an account under Denise and Blake's names. The second folder held pictures Carol had taken of her pharmacy receipts, laid out next to her actual pill bottles, with little handwritten notes comparing what should have been there against what was. She'd written that the count in her weekly organizer never quite lined up with what the pharmacy said they'd filled, that there always seemed to be a few extra tablets mixed in, small and round, that she didn't recognize from any of her regular prescriptions. The third folder was the one that put a knife straight through my chest. A screenshot of a text conversation Carol had somehow found on the shared family laptop we kept in the den, a conversation between Denise and someone saved only as Marcus, dated about a month before Carol died. Denise had written, "She's starting to ask too many questions about the account. We need to move faster before she says something to Dad." And Marcus had answered, "Just keep adjusting the dose slowly. Nobody looks twice at a stroke in a woman with her blood pressure. I sat there completely still, staring at that screen, feeling something come loose inside my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Renata put a hand on my shoulder and told me my wife had come to her, specifically because she was afraid that if anything happened to her, whoever was behind it would try to control the story before I ever learned the truth, and she'd been determined not to let that happen. She protected you from beyond the grave, Walter, Renata said quietly. Now we're going to protect you for real. I asked her why she'd told me to keep Denise and Blake away from all this. She said it plainly. If Carol's suspicions were right, and the evidence in front of us said they very likely were, then Denise and Blake were capable of a great deal more than stealing money. And if they realized we had this drive, I could be next in line, especially with a document already on file that could hand them control of everything Carol and I had spent our whole lives building. We need proof strong enough for the police, not just a bad feeling, Renata said. And we need to get it before they know we're looking. That afternoon, Renata called an old friend of hers, a retired county detective named Sam Okafor, no relation, just a coincidence of names she'd laughed about more than once over the years, who did private investigative work these days. Sam met us at Renata's office within the hour, a lean, quiet man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like he was writing everything down in his head. He went through the flash drive twice, silent the whole time, then finally said the thing none of us wanted to hear out loud. "This is enough to open an investigation," Sam said, "but it's not enough on its own to guarantee a conviction. We need the pharmacy records pulled officially through proper channels. We need a handwriting expert to look at that account signature. And honestly, Walter, if you're willing, a couple of cameras in your house for a short stretch would give us everything else. Because people like this, they talk when they think nobody's listening." I sat in that office, my wife 11 days in the ground, looking at two people I barely knew, asking me to walk back into my own home and act like nothing had changed while my daughter and her husband believed they'd already won. It was the hardest thing anybody had ever asked of me in my life. I said yes without a second's hesitation, because Carol had trusted me with the truth, and I was not about to let it go to waste. Sam wired two small cameras into our house 2 nights later, one tucked into a smoke detector above the kitchen table, one hidden inside an old radio on the bookshelf in the living room, while Denise and Blake believed I was staying with my cousin in Roanoke to grieve in peace. I moved back home the following week and told everyone I just needed to be around Carol's things for a while, to feel close to her. It took 13 days. 13 days of forcing myself to sit across the dinner table from my own daughter and her husband, nodding along while they talked about helping settle things. Watching Blake bring up our house on Long Meadow Drive not once, but 3 separate times, gently asking when I thought I might be ready to think about downsizing. Every night I went up to bed feeling sick clean through, and every morning I got up and did it all over again, because Sam told me the second they felt truly safe was the second they'd stop being careful. On the 14th day, it finally happened. Denise and Blake came by for Sunday sar, and after I excused myself upstairs early, claiming I was worn out, the kitchen camera caught the two of them alone at the table, voices low but perfectly clear. Denise said, word for word, "The account's fully in our names now, and once he agrees to sign off on the house, we're done. We don't even need that other paperwork anymore." Blake answered, "Just don't get careless like you did with your mother. That pharmacist almost caught the refill pattern last spring." Denise actually laughed. "Nobody double-checks a heart patient's numbers, Blake. Nobody ever does." Sam had that footage locked into an evidence file within the hour. Paired with the pharmacy records, his contact pulled showing an unexplained early refill pattern on a medication that can dangerously affect heart rhythm at high doses, and a forensic handwriting analysis confirming the account signature was forged, we finally had what Sam called an airtight case. Renata looked at me across her desk that evening and said quietly, "Now we bring them out into the open, Walter. On our terms, not theirs." We decided to do it at the reading of Carol's will, which our family lawyer, a woman named Grace Feldman, who'd handled our paperwork for close to 20 years, had already scheduled for the following Wednesday at her office downtown. Denise and Blake had no idea Sam would be sitting quietly in the small conference room next door, or that 2 county detectives would be parked outside in an unmarked sedan, waiting on his signal. I spent that whole week acting the exact same way I had for 13 days straight, tired, quiet, cooperative, letting Denise believe her plan was going exactly the way she'd hoped. She even hugged me the morning of the meeting and told me how proud she was of how strong I'd been through all of it. I stood there letting her arms wrap around me, thinking about that text message glowing on Renata's laptop screen, and feeling nothing at all but cold, steady patience. We all sat down in Grace's office at 10 o'clock that morning. Denise in charcoal gray, Blake in a dark blue suit, both of them composed, almost relaxed, clearly expecting nothing more than a simple formality before they collected what they already believed was theirs. Grace worked through the standard opening of the will reading, and then, right on cue, she looked over at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to say before she continued. Actually, yes, I said, and I watched Denise's face shift, just barely, the very first flicker of unease crossing it. Before we go any further, I think it's time everybody in this room saw what your mother left behind. I nodded toward the door, and Renata Okafor walked in carrying her laptop, followed by Sam, whose face Blake clearly recognized from somewhere years back, maybe an old encounter. Maybe just plain instinct, because the color drained straight out of my son-in-law's face. Denise's voice came out sharp. "What is this? Dad, what's going on?" I looked at her steady and said, "Your mother's exactly what's going on." Renata set the laptop down on the conference table and played the kitchen footage without a word of introduction. Denise's own voice filled that small room, clear as day, talking about the account being fully transferred, about not needing that other paperwork anymore. And then Blake's voice answering back, warning her not to get careless like she had with her mother. The room went dead silent, except for that recording playing out loud, every word of it landing like a hammer against stone. Denise's face went white, then blotchy red, and she shot up out of her chair so fast it scraped hard against the floor. That's not what it sounds like." "That's taken completely out of context. Sit down," Sam Okafor said calmly, showing his credentials for the first time since walking through the door. "There are 2 detectives waiting right outside this building, and everything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and pending toxicology results from an exhumation request already filed with the county coroner regarding Carol Griggs's cause of death." Blake hadn't said a single word yet. He just sat there, staring at the surface of the table, and I watched something in my son-in-law's face finally break. Not innocence that had been gone a long while, but the very specific look of a man who has just understood there is nowhere left in this world for him to run. "Walter," he said, voice cracking, "I never wanted her to actually die. It was only supposed to slow her down, keep her confused enough that she wouldn't fight us on the paperwork." I felt Renata's hand land on my shoulder, steady, holding me in place. Because for 1 second, the whole room tilted sideways, and all I could see was Carol in that hospital bed. I never got the chance to reach in time, but I didn't shout. I didn't need to. "Your mother stood over that stove every single Sunday for 30 years, making sure you had a full plate before she'd even think about filling her own," I said quietly. "And you sat across from her counting down the days until you got the house." The detectives came through the door 2 minutes later. Denise cried the whole way down to the car. Blake never said another word. It's been almost 9 months now since that morning in Grace Feldman's office. Blake pled guilty to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery, and is currently serving out a 5-year sentence at Roxbury Correctional Institution. Denise's case went further still. The exhumation and toxicology report came back showing dangerously elevated levels of a heart rhythm medication in Carol's system, well beyond anything any doctor had ever prescribed her, and Denise was convicted of involuntary manslaughter on top of the financial charges. She's looking at 13 years. Marcus, it turned out, was Blake's cousin, a pharmacy tech who'd been quietly funneling the medication out under everyone's nose and is now facing his own set of charges entirely separate from ours. I still live in the house on Longmeadow Drive. Some mornings, the quiet in that place still hurts in a way I don't think will ever fully heal, but most days now it just feels honest, if that makes any sense to you. I got every dollar of that retirement money back through the courts. Though if I'm being truthful with you, friend, the money was never really what any of this was about for me. Renata Okafor and I have become close friends since all of this happened, something neither one of us ever expected walking into it. She tells me now that Carol used to talk about me at the office more than I ever had any idea of, always proud, always certain I'd do right by her, if it ever came down to it. I set up a small memorial fund in Carol's name through the cardiac care program at Meritus Medical Center to help families cover the follow-up screenings that might have caught what was happening to her sooner before it ever got as far as it did. It isn't much yet, but it's growing a little every month, and every dollar that goes into it carries her name forward, doing something good in this world, which is exactly the kind of thing that woman would have wanted. I think about that hallway outside the funeral home more than I probably should. Renata's voice shaking on the other end of that phone, telling me to come see something before it was too late to matter. My wife protected me one last time from beyond the grave, and I intend to spend whatever years I've got left making sure that protection meant something. If this story touched something in you tonight, friend, go ahead and hit that like button, leave me a comment, and tell me your thoughts, and subscribe if you'd like more real stories just like this one. I'll see you in the next one.